Third versions of Pokemon games. Everyone and their mum loves them. You get rid of glitches, mistakes, and lackluster parts of the original, fixing them up whilst adding new features and the ability to catch different legendaries. And of course, entirely new Pokemon. This tradition eventually faded away, as now we get 2 games that come out and DLC that adds on later. Although some Pokemon games still really needed that third version. Pokemon X and Y. But now we need to talk about how this small ripple of change ended up creating a massive wave in terms of the Pokemon manga. Since that's what we do here, after all, I'm a manga channel. Let's begin at the beginning. Obviously, Pokemon Red and Green are the first Pokemon games, and the manga adapted these 2 titles into the first arc and the first 2 main characters. The hot-headed Red and his green-colored starter, and the arrogant but cool Green and his red-colored starter. I'm going to be using the Japanese names for this one since it just makes sense. But now the question is, what about Squirtle? There's 3 starter Pokemon in total, and are we really just going to leave one of them out? Well, no, as a couple months after the first 2 games, Pokemon Blue would hit the scene, being the first upper version of the Pokemon series. But more importantly, giving Squirtle the chance to be equal with its starter brethren. Now the only issue is, who can have the Squirtle? Red and Green's designs have already been taken, and they both already have their own starters. What we need now is another character, and luckily a ray of hope shined down on the manga team. A while back, Ken Sugimori had created a design for a character that accompanied Red and Green in a strategy guide. Even better, this character had a Squirtle and was made to create a trio of trainers. This design was also featured in some Pokemon craft book manga, once again joining Red and Green. So now the route was clear, give the character a name, personality, and motive, and the trainer to represent Blue and Squirtle would be born, being appropriately named Blue. Since this character had no template to go off, unlike the other 2, this allowed full creativity for the manga team. I know technically Red also didn't have a blueprint, but at the same time, he's a young boy, so his personality was pretty simple to assume, just like with Ash. So what they did was create a foil to the boys. Where Red and Green could easily get explosive and rush into things, Blue preferred to step back and manipulate others from the shadows. Couple that with her morally great goal, and she was perfect, also being the first to fill the gender representation role. And thus started the third version character tradition, picking up the remaining starter and the slack that the other 2 trainers had. But trouble struck once more. Due to the anime's success, a 4th Kanto-based game was created, being loosely based on said anime. This being Pokemon Yellow, with Pikachu acting as its mascot. Now, this wasn't really that bad of a situation. The manga hadn't dealt with the Elite Four, so they already had a storyline. And Red already had a Pikachu, so all he had to do was continue his adventure. Or if that couldn't work, they could add Ash to the manga. Yeah, perfect. Or at least that's the easy option. Instead, the manga team decided, hey, let's try our own hand at making a character. Channeling everything that makes Pokemon, Pokemon, and creating a trainer similar to a bug catcher in appearance, mainly due to their massive straw hat, but also wielding a fishing rod and wearing a tunic. And of course, we can't forget their iconic yellow hair. This trainer had a design where you also couldn't tell their gender. Perfect for a mysterious trainer who would take the mantle of the 4th main character. And with Red's Pikachu temporarily joining their side, Yellow was born. Even more so than their predecessor Blue, Yellow had nothing to go off anything-wise. Their personality, design, and even goal was up in the air, and the team took this with full stride, creating the iconic Evil Elite Four arc, as well as the battle that argued the humans deserved to live with Pokemon. You see, these guys were doing Gen 5 stuff all the way back in Gen 1. They were ahead of the game. But they didn't stop there. They cranked the originality to 11 and gave Yellow the power of the Viridian Forest, a unique ability that few share, granting the ability to hear Pokemon's thoughts and heal them at will. This is something we could never see nowadays, with how established the Pokemon lore and world is. But back then, pretty much anything was fair game, and it was awesome. Everything about Yellow's design screams early Pokemon. It's believable that she's a character from a series about catching small pocket-sized monsters, literally the original premise of the franchise. Yellow quickly became a fan favorite character and is arguably the face of Pokemon Adventures as a whole, despite not being the only original trainer from the series. But we'll get to that later. At this point, the characters that were being made by the team were rivaling the ones that already had game counterparts, and this trend continues into the 2nd generation. Gold and Silver would release, with Gold and Silver being created too. These 2 were already polar opposites, Gold being an irresponsible boy with a heart of gold, aided by his trusty Cyndaquil, and Silver being a boy carrying a heavy duty on his back, forcing him to commit questionable decisions, and followed by his loyal Totodile. Pokemon Crystal would eventually be released, being an upgrade to the 2 games, as every 3rd version is. But what's this? There's already a 3rd trainer to represent these games? That's right, for Pokemon Crystal, females finally came into existence, as now you had the choice to play as either a boy or a girl. At this time, the manga was also switching artists to a person who had never really interacted with Pokemon, so having a blueprint design was definitely a lifesaver. But that isn't to say this girl wouldn't be an interesting and unique character. The girl would be named Crystal, or Chris for short, and while Gold and Silver had missions that they worked towards without a care in the world, Crystal is a professional, being tasked by Professor Oak directly to catch every single Pokemon, and she does just that, whilst following the rules and looking sick whilst doing so. Another success in terms of third version characters. At this point, you may be arguing that she's the same as Red, Gold or Silver, since her design already existed and they just added a personality onto her. And whilst that is kind of true, this felt early enough in Pokemon that Crystal felt like an original character. After all, until Masters brought her back, Chris might as well have been a forgotten character. But over in the manga, they said screw Lyra and chose to continue with Chris. But now with female characters being a new standard, there's no reason for these third version characters to be anything to write home about. You've got your boy, your girl, and a rival, all three to represent the starters. Well, at least that's what you'd think. Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire are here, and Generation 3 is looking pretty strong. Ruby's a boy who's into contests, and Sapphire's a girl who's into battles. Look at the manga go, breaking gender norms already. These two contrast each other perfectly. Ruby even got the blue starter Mudkip, and Sapphire got the red starter Torchic, just like in the first arc. Now all that's left is Trico, who of course will go to Wally, right? They'll just change his name to the third version game, which is Emerald, and he's already green. It works perfectly. Just give him a Pokedex and he's a Dex holder. Yeah, right, guys? Alright, let me stop dragging it. We already know this wasn't the case. A short gremlin whose goal is to beat the Battle Frontier, and of course he's going to be partnering with Trico. Well, to be fair, it's actually Sceptile in this case. All this time, rivals were included as part of the trio and it worked out, since the game versions of the characters also shared the same name with the respective versions. In the games you could name your rival, but at the end of the day, the canon was saying green is green and silver is silver. But now, Wally was simply left to just be Wally, whilst Emerald came onto the stage. I get what they were doing since Wally was a rival that you didn't name, he was just a single character. But at the same time, he already spent time with Trico and evolved it into a Grovyle. He was pretty much a Dex holder. In fact, he even had a Pokedex with him for a while. Realistically, this still should have been a good thing. All this time I've been gassing up third version characters with how unique they are, and their new designs and differences from the standard. But now when I get exactly what I want, I complain? Well yeah, of course I'm complaining, look at the guy. I'm playing. Emerald's a cool guy. His mission of defeating the Battle Frontier and catching Jirachi, as per request of Professor Oak, is sick. And him being sort of a little brother to Crystal is also cool. Not to mention his more competitive stance to Pokemon battles, something we hadn't seen yet. But even with all this uniqueness, his design really leaves a lot to be desired. Where Yellow perfectly captured the essence of Pokemon, Emerald kind of does the opposite in my opinion. Fortunately, he does get a glow up in the Oras arc. Another issue of the character is his personality, which can come across as whiny. Ultimately, he just ain't that guy. At the end of the day, he was made to be Trico's partner, and he did just that. Maybe others agreed with my opinions on the guy, as by the next game, this unique character trend would be broken. Pokemon Diamond and Pearl would come out and we would get Diamond, a kind-hearted glutton, and the bossy but helpful Pearl. These two form a comedy duo, and as you can see, Pearl's design is clearly Barry's. So once again, the rivals are back to taking the role of main character, even despite the fact that his name isn't Pearl in the canon. But now the question is, what about Platinum? Well, this title and name goes to Platinum herself, who takes upon Dawn's design, in a situation very similar to Gen 2. Only difference being, she was there from the start and just hadn't had her name revealed. But most importantly, all three starters are able to be present and share the spotlight, in a form of equality that hadn't even been done to this point. When I say that this was the perfect trio, I mean this was the perfect trio. But now is where everything starts going downhill. As we all know, Pokemon Black and White is next. There's only 2 games here, and Black and White are appropriately named Black and White. So what are we gonna do starter-wise? Black is accompanied by his Tepig, and White is also accompanied by a Tepig. Huh? Yeah, so the manga made the choice of keeping Cheren and Bianca the same. Makes sense, you can't name them after all. But it also decided to give them starter Pokemon too. Now, to be completely fair, Black, Cheren, and Bianca are all from New Town, and they started their journey together. For a little while, these guys were technically Pokedex holders. White, however, met Black later on. Also, she doesn't actually own the Tepig, instead it works with her as part of her agency. In this case, not having a third version character is fine. All the starters are happily taken anyway. Now all we have to do is see them grow. Which is where the problems start. Black's Tepig evolves into an Emble, But as for Cheren, he stops halfway, only getting a Servine. And Bianca, her Oshawott never even evolves. This choice is for story reasons, as it reflects the character's development by using the stage of evolution their Pokemon is to represent themselves. And honestly, I'm all for it. Storytelling is the most important thing here, especially when you link it to the Pokemon themselves. But what about the other final Evos of the other starters? Are we just not going to see them? Well, no, as that's where Amanda the Superior comes in. As I said earlier, White never owned her Tepig, and eventually it chooses to follow N. But in return, White gets a Servine that follows her, eventually evolving into a Superior. Okay, now that leaves Samurott left. Technically, Cedric Jupiter has one, but that's probably just a temporary thing, right? And eventually, he'll gift it to Grey, the soon-to-be third version to go alongside Black and White, finally giving us Pokemon Grey version. Delusions aside, Pokemon Black and White 2 comes out, and since it's a direct sequel, it's adding 2 more games to the Unova series, just like in Kanto. So we get Blake and Whitley, who represent Nate and Rosa. But what about the starters? How are they going to be allocated? They can't both get a Samurott, right? A possible choice is to name Hugh Grey. It definitely fits his design, and that way everyone else can get starters as well. It would also be great to have the rival be more involved in the story, unlike what happened with Cheren and Bianca, where they were robbed of being Pokedex holders. But sadly, this doesn't happen. Like I said, Samurott stays with Cedric, and Blake already has a duo of his own, which will not be evolving. Hugh remains as Hugh, and although he does get more spotlight than his predecessor rivals, he still isn't made a Dex holder, being sidelined as far as main character rivals go. As for Whitley, she's just not getting a starter at all. After all, there's no unique 4th version with, I don't know, a Mulga or something, which makes things kind of awkward, but at the same time, there's nothing that can be done. They did try justify everything at the end of Black and White 2 with a cool evolution line Pledge Attack, but this team up was only temporary for some trainers. And this would be the beginning of the end for 3rd version characters. Pokemon X and Y felt like another Black and White in terms of this scenario. X got Chespin and Y got Froakie. Fennekin was meant to join the gang, but his Pokeball got lost, just like what happened with Trico. And because this game has 3 rivals that are all already named, who travel with X and Y mind you, there's just no room for Fennekin to tag along. In the games, Shauna takes the role of getting the starter, but it wouldn't work here as the requirements are clearly that you need to have a Pokedex and be named Zed. A Pokemon Zed would have been the ideal fix to the situation, especially with how lacking X and Y felt as games. It would also give us another original design character of the same name to get Fennekin, but a Pokemon Zed wouldn't be a thing until many years later. So Fennekin and all of its fans were cursed to the abyss of being in the hands of Team Flare, who would evolve the Pokemon to its final form, but it still didn't receive the same attention as the other 2 starters. To fix things out, the Pokemon eventually left Team Flare and went to Whitley, finally giving her a starter and Fennekin a Dex holder. But at this point it feels a little too late, and this image that already exists doesn't feature a Samurott or a Delphox. So everything's kinda just ruined. Alright, we've done enough dramatics. The future of Pokemon games now is there's no 3rd versions, as DLCs are gonna take over. But DLC isn't a character name or a character that can own the 3rd starter. And because of this, the remaining regions I haven't talked about suffer the same fate as Unova, just worse. Alola gave Sun and Moon Litten and Rowlet respectively, and although Hau did have his Popplio evolve into its final evolution, he still wasn't no Eclipse character. And he most definitely wasn't a Dex holder, rarely even appearing in the story. In the games, he was contender for champion, but here, he just retires and settles for opening a Master Dollar shop. Next was Henry Sword and Casey Shield, where each trainer got a Grookey and a Score Bunny. And now you're probably expecting me to say Hop got Sobble, but nah. In what was a cruel form of torture, the manga said, hey, let's make an original character to give the last starter Pokemon. Even if they can't be a Dex holder, they can at least have the starter and give it some respect. So now you may be thinking, we're really gonna get Gun, the 3rd version character to go with Pokemon Sword and Shield, right? But nah, these guys really said let's pick this random kid from Route 3, make him the main character to join the gang. They're really toying with us at this point, because why would they ever do this? This was the perfect chance to make a unique design character whose design could actually complement Sword and Shields. But we really just had to get this sorry NPCR kid Marvin, and he gets more spotlight than some of the rivals that have appeared before him. Honestly, I would have preferred Hop just to get the Pokemon, to be honest. Lastly, we have Scarlet and Violet, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Nemona has Quaxley, simple as that. It makes sense and there's nothing we can do about it. In conclusion, the point I was trying to get across was, whenever we got 3rd protagonists, they were always cool in some way. Green, Yellow, Crystal and even Emerald were all peak characters for their originality. But even later on, when they used Barry's design for Pearl, it was still peak because he was a genuine main character who was a Dex holder and gave the starters a chance to be represented. But when we lost that in Black and White, the star Pokemon became unfairly showcased, with at least one evolution line always getting the short end of the stick, which really wasn't cool. As I said, there wasn't much they could do with this. There was no third version of the game that existed. I still feel like it would have been better if they made whatever rival character that existed into a dex holder. So they could have had at least some equality in the starters, or just give the last starter to one of the dex holders so they can have two. I just find it kind of lame that a trio of Pokemon had to be broken up for no reason, especially if you're a fan of that said Pokemon. At the end of the day, the manga's an adaptation of the games, but I don't think that should limit them to follow the game so strictly. When they do their own original stuff, they cook, and they should do the same with the characters they feature. Just like in the anime, there's no Paul or Alan in the games, but they're still some of the best characters in the Pokemon franchise. And you see it all the time with the other Pokemon mangas that exist as well, if you've even read them. Anyway, that's all I gotta say in this video. This was really just me rambling my opinions, and you may not agree with them, so let me know in the comment section your own opinion on this subject. And be sure to like and subscribe for more Pokemon manga content. With all that said and done, I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.